We are at the beginning of our poetry unit, and most likely this is one of the first videos that you're seeing for our poetry unit. I want to give us a bit of a recap of where we've been. I've been trying to prove two things to you that I think are going to be incredibly important for us as we move forward in the course, not just in poetry, but in short story, in Merchant of Venice that we come to later, and the rest of our texts. The first thing I've been trying to suggest to us, and that we've been kind of dealing with as a class, I hope, is the importance of implication. We're doing poetry, but it's not just about writing poetry. It really doesn't boil down to we're just trying to understand poems. We're looking for something just a little bit more broad. I want us as a community, as a class, to become better at finding things that are not directly stated, but that can be implied. My guess is I have probably given you the story about the little boy and his dad who are sitting in a tree. The little boy looks at his dad and says, "There's a girl in my class, Emily, who looks like a tree frog." And the dad says, "Don't say that." And the little boy says, "But I like tree frogs." And I'm trying to suggest to us that if the dad is to respond to the boy and only talk to him about whether or not he likes tree frogs or what kinds of tree frogs he likes, if the dad is only going to stay in the direct meaning of what his son is saying, I think he's going to miss the most important point. I think he's going to miss the fact that his son likes Emily, that he's not actually making fun of her at all, but that he has a crush on her. I think, and we're going to navigate through this, and I'm excited about that, but I think that often, maybe more than just often, when we miss those things that are beneath the surface, and we focus only on those things which are surface level, we miss sometimes the depth and the beauty of truth. We miss some things that are really true. And I don't want us to be people who are like that, and I definitely don't want us to be readers who are like that. So I've been trying to say implication is something not directly stated, but that can be implied. Now, of course, it's not anything. It's something that can be implied, and it means evidence. So we're going to be looking at different pieces of evidence that we can use in the genre of poetry to say what really is being implied here. I've probably used a word with you already, the word compelling. We're trying to find what is the most compelling interpretation, the most compelling implication. We're not trying to say what's the right answer, and we're definitely not trying to say what does Mr. Baird think and how can I give it back to him. We're saying if there's something under the surface that can be implied, what is the most compelling version of it? And we got to find evidence for that. We've looked at speaker audience already. We've said a poet can choose a specific speaker because the poet is not always the speaker. In fact, we can never assume that the poet, him or herself, is the speaker. They're going to choose a speaker to speak their poem, and they're going to choose an audience. Sometimes that audience is in the poem, and sometimes the audience is us, or I suppose it's always us to some degree. Who that speaker is and who that audience is changes how we understand the implication. In fact, it's going to be intimately tied to the implication. We're going to look at sound today. The second thing I'm trying to prove to us that form is content. I've probably given you either examples about proposals or examples about basketball, but I'm trying to say, listen, the way how a poem is made, its form, its style, isn't just something separate from its content. How it means and what it means are often much more tied than we're willing to admit. So what we're looking at today is sound, and I'm going to suggest to you that sound, the sound of words, and in the days to come, the sound of a poem is intimately tied to its implication. I want to do a little psychological test. This test has been done on many, many people. You can look it up online. It's pretty intriguing to me. We've got two shapes here. two shapes. And we've got two words. One word is baoba, baoba, and one word is tiki, tiki and baoba. What I want you to do is pause this clip just for a second, and in your head, I want you to say which one of these, in your first impression, which one of these shapes would you name tiki, and which would you name baoba? Which is named tiki, and which is named baoba? Pause it right now and tell me, and think of what your first impression is. Okay, hopefully you paused that, and hopefully you have a name. Now, I'm going to take a guess, and this is almost going to seem like magic, because I think that it's true 95% of the time. I'm guessing that you called this one tiki, and I'm guessing that you called this one baoba. Now, of course, it's a 50-50 chance, so maybe I got it right, maybe I got it wrong. But having done this example with many classes, many groups of people, my numbers have worked out to about 95% of people calling this tiki and this baoba. Now, we're not as a whole class right now, so we're not all putting up our hands and saying which one was named what. We'll do that tomorrow in our class, just to kind of get a sense of the numbers. But I'm guessing that 95% of our class, give or take, has named this tiki and this baoba. And that's crazy. There's something absolutely nuts about the fact that we can all kind of decide together that a shape can be have an intimate relationship with a sound. How can one of these shapes be more like a sound than others? People who don't really like poetry at all often will say, poetry is just about feelings. There's no evidence. There's no hard objective truth here. It's just whatever you want it to be. And when I start to say that sound has meaning, I imagine there are some of you, in fact, I kind of hope there are some of you who are saying just those questions, who are saying, wait a minute, this is getting way too subjective for me. But here's the crazy part. Regardless of the answers to those questions, regardless of if you're asking those questions, it is very, very possible that 95% of us associated a word with a shape. If I got to ask you, how come you named this tiki? Or if you're in the minority of people who would name this baoba, if I said, why would you name this baoba? My guess is that you would start to come up with reasons. Often I've heard things like this. Well, tiki is kind of a sharp sound, and this has sharp, pointy things. Tiki is kind of pointy, tiki, and so I kind of thought that this was pointy. Or baoba sounds round, and this was kind of a round shape. And I often throw it right back to the students and I say, what? You're saying a word can be sharp or a word can be round? And I'm being somewhat facetious because I think that's true. I think a word can be sharp. I think a word can be soft, or a word can be round. And I wonder if this proves that. I would love for you to think about that, take some notes, and come to class prepared to either debate that with us or suggest that you agree. I'd also like for you to turn to a poem called The Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. It should be in the poems that I have given you, or maybe you've gone on to Edline and found it. It's by Lewis Carroll, and it's called The Jabberwocky, and it starts with this phrase, "'Twas brillig." Now, it's very possible that neither of those words make sense to you, and that's totally fine. In fact, brillig is a word that Lewis Carroll made up. Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, but he was also a writer. He wrote children's books, and you may be familiar with Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, both works of his. In both works, he brings the reader to this mythical world with crazy monsters and ridiculous situations, a fantastical world. In this poem, he does the same. It's an epic journey of a hero who goes to kill the Jabberwocky and comes home victorious. But he needs to set up his scene. He needs to show you a little bit about the world. And in this poem, of course, he could say, he could use English to do that, and we'd all be familiar with the words he'd use. In Alice in Wonderland, this is what he does. He uses English words that English speakers would be familiar with and crafts a world. In this poem, he decides to do it without using English words, or at least with using very, very few. He says this, and I hope you're looking at the poem. "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mumraths outgrabe." Very few of those words are going to make sense to you, and very few of them make sense to me too, at least in terms of the language that I speak. "Twas" is just "it was," kind of in a conjunction. That's why we have the little apostrophe here. And I think in some sense he's kind of bringing us into the world, starting us with English, moving off to just sounds that he's going to create. I'm kind of reminded of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," where the Grinch is about to come in, or at least a world that is unlike ours. This is what he does. "'Twas." This is the word I really want to focus on, though. Brillig. "'Twas brillig." I want you to think about what that might look like. Brillig. I'm guessing again, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you tomorrow, that you're not thinking something sunny. It's not bright. It's not this like beautiful surrounding. I'm guessing that you're either seeing it as dark or more likely cold. "'Twas brillig." I see this picture of a barren landscape that's absolutely cold, that is devoid of any sort of life. From here, he's going to move into describing it even more. "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe." Tomorrow, we're going to say, wait a minute, if sound has meaning, and he's using sounds, is it possible that we could come to even some sort of an agreement on what those sounds mean? We're going to try to say together, looking at this poem, what does the landscape look like? What I want you to do is I want you to look through that first paragraph at least, and the whole poem if possible, and say, what are the words that I don't know, that are not English, and what do I think they might mean? Remember, we're looking for implication. We're saying form is content. And if sound is one of the ways that a poet forms his poem, it may have something to do with what is being suggested, with what is being implied. What do you think is being implied about the environment here through completely non-English words? Looking forward to our discussion tomorrow.